What height was such that you could only hit over it if you got above the right launch angle. Okay? So you had to hit all that we told the batters were you need to hit the ball over the fence, over the barrier. Okay? We didn't give any instruction at all about how to do that. Okay? So you can see the big difference in the methodology there. We're not telling them anything about how to swing, where your feet should be. All we're doing is giving this new constraint and letting them sort it out. An additional twist that we did in this study is we used, with the constraint simulation, what we did was actually kind of use a way to challenge the batter, is we actually moved the barrier further out as they got better. So if you could hit we used what's called a staircase method. So if you could hit the ball over the barrier, we moved it out and we made it taller so it stayed the same angle. We kept moving it further and further away. Okay? And what we're doing is really incorporating something else there called the challenge point hypothesis. So we keep pushing you so the task you're doing is just a bit hard for you. Okay? So we don't make it easier or harder. Okay, so that was the basic design of 3 studies. I'll show you a few different ways to look at the data. Also, I mentioned what the groups were. These were experienced players. They've been playing for a while. What we did was we brought a bunch of players into the lab and we screened them, and we picked out players that hit the ball really hard, but on the ground, okay, most of the time. Because those are the players that would probably most benefit from this change. Okay? So that was the study. I'll show you some data, okay. These first couple ones are kind of messy, but just to show you the really raw data. What we have here, this is the launch angle of the hit versus the exit velocity of the hit. And these are all these points are outcomes of the swing. Okay, the 3 groups are in different colors. Anything below this line is a ground ball. There's line drives, fly balls up there. This was pre-training, so you can see all the groups are pretty overlapping, which is good, what you want in the training study. And most of the hits are down here on the ground. After training, after the 6 weeks of training, we get a kind of a different pattern. The open circles are the internal focus. They're kind of still where they used to be. The external and the constraints are kind of moving up here. Okay, they're getting more balls in the air. Okay, and an easier way to show this is by looking at kind of the proportion of the outcomes. Pre-training, okay, the black bars are ground balls, the white bars are fly balls, okay? So you can see they all had large number of ground balls, small fly balls. After training, the constraints, you can see the ground balls getting much less, fly balls getting more home runs too, which is good. So you're getting this different pattern. So the basic pattern we found in terms of getting the ball in the air, the constraints was the best. External focus was close behind, but it was significantly worse, and the internal focus was last. A couple more points about this. One of the things we also found was when we look at the exit velocity improved for both the constraints and the external focus, even though we didn't train that at all, right? We were just telling them to hit the ball over the fence. We weren't telling them to hit the ball further. So that's a nice side effect. So we got this kind of change. It seems to have been an instructional method. Let me bring it back to the variability. So what I did for this was I looked at the variability in the path of the bat, okay, relative to the oncoming pitch. And I plotted this for the different blocks of the training from week to week. And I found a really interesting pattern here. Okay? This is the constraints group in black here. Okay? So what you can see is all 3 groups were about the same level of variability in this movement at the start. The constraints-led group had a massive increase in variability and then kind of settled back down. The internal group, okay, this dotted line, pretty much stayed the same. Okay? So this, I haven't really linked it to performance yet, but this looks like some sort of functional exploration, right? You're increasing this variability, getting it back down, and doing some sort of functional thing. Okay? So from this study, a couple things I'll we seem to be getting better results from the constraints approach, just imposing a new constraint on the athlete rather than using some focus of attention instruction. But I'll point out a couple things. One, it might be a kind of an additive effect, because when you use a constraints, you add a new constraint to your practice, it's almost always going to involve an external focus of its attention instruction, right? Hit the ball over the barrier is an external focus of attention instruction. So you really, I had both of them there, okay? So maybe the two were added together. The other thing I want to mention is this internal focus, okay? And this is something I've gone back and forth with a lot over the years. If you look at the research, including this one, it'll say internal focus of attention referring to an athlete's body is terrible, right? The results are always horrible. Over the years, I've come to kind of be a little more moderate on this position because I think there's a couple of limitations with the research. One is, the one I try to address, is we're not using a lot of studies are not using instructions that a coach would actually use. They're just experimenter making up instructions. The second one, and most importantly, and this is something that you saw Sean, like if you listen to Sean this morning, he was using external focus of attention cues. He was talking about the person's shin, right? That's their body. But what Sean was doing that nobody does in any of these experiments is he was individualizing it, right? So I think if I brought a really good coach into my lab and I let them individualize internal focus attention cues for every different participant, I think we'd get a much different story, okay? So I think in the right hands, internal focus of attention cues can be valuable. But this evidence and all the other ones, what I would suggest, and again I'll point to Sean, if you listen carefully for Sean, he talked about putting pressure on the laces, right? He never talked about putting pressure on the foot, right? That's a great example of making a subtle change in your instruction to make it an internal focus of attention cue external. The laces are external to your body. It sounds like the most trivial change, but as we've seen again and again, it has a big effect, okay? So this is kind of my side note about cueing. I would, if internal focus of attention cues work for you, and you can adapt them to your individual athlete, like Sean said, take what message that you like, so I would stick with them. But I would also consider trying to tweak them to external ones at some time as well. The other study I want to mention is the most recent one I'm doing that I just writing up for publication, is looking at differential learning versus constraints, okay? This study, what we did was to look at the task of directional painting, okay? So trying to hit the ball in a particular direction. What we're trying to get trained batters to do is hit the ball to the opposite field. Okay, so for me, when I'm a left-handed batter, I try to hit it over to left field. It's a very, it's hard enough to hit the ball at all in baseball, never mind hit it where you want. What you need to do is kind of wait on the ball. You have to let it get deeper. You can't, if you swing out in front, you're usually going to pull it. And you want to look for certain pitches, usually out from your body. Trying to hit an opposite field for one really close to your body can be difficult. So we trained batters again in the simulation. We had two different groups. The first group was the Differential Learning group. And what we did with this was we had batters, every single swing, we told them, gave them instructions about how to position their body, okay? So whether their front leg was back, whether the left elbow was down, whether their eye was closed. If you look at studies on differential learning, they seem like a random series of conditions. But what you're trying to do is deliberately force the batter to go through a bunch of high variability conditions to kind of encourage them to find a solution, okay? So you're kind of forcing this movement variability. For the constraints-led approach, what we did was two different constraints. One was we had, again, like the hitting study, we had a barrier on the field that you weren't supposed to hit to, okay? So it kind of discouraged you from hitting there. The other thing we did is we put actually pieces of foam around the plate. It was kind of tailored for each batter. which really discourage you from hitting the ball far out in front of the plate. Okay? If you did that, you'd actually smack into the foam. So we actually kind of put these obstacles around the plate that you had to move, swing around. Okay? So again, we're not telling you how to swing, how to position your body, do anything like that. We're just creating this new constraints that weren't there before and leaving it up to you to figure it out. Okay? And what we found so far, we also in this study had a control group that did no training. And what we found so far, here's the number of hits to the opposite field. We're getting the best results from the constraints-led approach again. Okay? This is looking at kind of a kinematic variable, the point of contact. Again, we're getting the best of the constraints. Differential learning is effective, but constraints-led approach is effective, is more. And my initial view, this is very, very new stuff. My initial view is I tend to prefer the constraints-led approach because it's a more kind of informed, systematic way to manipulate variability, right? You're trying to, you have the variability you want in mind, right? I want the batter not taking the ball out in front, so I'm going to impose a constraint to try to encourage that. I want them to become attuned to the space between players in soccer, so I'm going to put this constraint. So, constraints to me seems to be more systematic and kind of, I like that part about it, where differential learning seems to be a bunch of random things, right? In the true form of it, where we're just trying everything we can think of and see what happens. Okay? So those are some initial studies. I'm going to try to do some more of these. Last couple of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about, so we talked a lot about good variability so far. What about dysfunctional variability? Well, I want to look at a couple of different studies, techniques that we've used that we've seen this. And I'm going to go back to, again, a term that Sean used this morning. So the idea, actually I have it in a second. The idea, let me see, of a bandwidth. Okay? So here's the diagram I showed before. Okay? These are the potential variations in swing timing. Okay, that a batter can use along here. But as a coach, you're probably not going to want to allow all of them, right? You're probably going to want to put some constraint on this, some bandwidth, and say, you know, although it's possible to swing this way, I don't really like that. That looks like it's going to cause an injury. Okay? So a coach's job is sometimes to restrict this variability. Okay? And that's, you know, kind of where you jump in and do correction. I don't like this up here. But what we've also seen is athletes sometimes impose these on themselves, okay? These kind of constraints on variability. The first way that we've seen this happen is when we look at performance under pressure, okay? So when you put anxiety, usually kind of competitive pressure or being observed, this was actually a study of pitchers, okay? What we tend to see is this dysfunctional movement variability. These change in the movement patterns. And typically where you see it are variables that we know differentiate different levels of expertise. Okay? The other one that we've seen it, let me see that we've seen it happen, is when we look at recovery from injury. Okay? So if I go, so what I want to do is show you kind of a study that we published a few years ago, and then talk a little bit about how it relates to variability again. So what we were looking for was what happens when a person is recovering from injury in terms of their focus of attention. Okay? So we're not giving focus of attention instructions here, we're just measuring where you focus your attention. And so what we did in this study was we compared 3 groups of batters. A group that I recruited from that was post-ACL knee surgery. Okay? They'd been given full physical clearance to play, but they hadn't started yet. Okay? It took me a while to find that exact parameter. We compared them with an expert control group. So batters that were as close as we could get to the same age range, the same competitive level, but had no history of knee injury. And then we had a novice control group that were way less experienced. Okay? And what we did in this study was, what I wanted to measure was what these batters focused their attention on while swinging. So what I used to do that, and I've done this in a lot of experiments, is I introduce a secondary task in the experiment. Okay? So not only do you have to hit, but you have to judge something else about your motion. And we do it after you swing. Okay? And so what we did was give kind of batters probes, ask them questions about their swing after they finished it. And there was 4 different ones we asked them. The first thing we asked them was about the ball. Okay? And what we did was have a little kind of marker on the field, and we asked them, did you hit the ball to the left or the right of that marker, as a left or back? Okay? So that's one judgment they had to make. A second judgment they would have to make on a completely different swing would be about their leg. And what we asked them to do is, we played a sound during the swing, and we said, when you heard that sound, was your knee more or less bent than kind of some reference? Okay? So they're making a judgment about their knee angle. We then had them make a judgment, a similar judgment about their arm angle, the lead arm, and then we had a set where we made them do nothing. Okay? And what we can do is look at the accuracy of these judgments, right? If you're really good at judging your arm angle, you're probably focusing your attention on it, right? So here's what we